Welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works, a podcast for teachers, instructional coaches, administrators, and anyone else who supports teachers in the classroom. This show is a proud member of the BE Podcast Network, shows that help you go beyond education. Find all our shows at bepodcastnetwork.com. I am Gene Tavernetti, the host for this podcast, and my goal for this episode, like all episodes, is that you laugh at least once and that you leave with an actionable idea for better teaching. A quick reminder, no cliches, no buzzwords, only stuff that works. I'm so very excited to talk to my guest today because she operates at the intersection of technology, literacy, and research. My guest today is Dr. Jayne Lammers. And Dr. Lammers began her education career as a middle and high school literacy teacher, sparking a passion for supporting teachers in making learning relevant and engaging for all students. She went on to earn her PhD in curriculum and instruction at Arizona State University and spent 15 years in higher education, preparing teachers for the challenges of changing classrooms. Her research explored the intersection of students' interests and technology's affordances, aiming to make instruction more equitable and impactful. In 2019, she earned a Fulbright U.S. Scholar Award to research the digital literacy practices of secondary students in Central Java, Indonesia. Now, as the Director of Learning Design at Edmentum, Dr. Lammers leads the team who ensures that Edmentum's products accelerate learning in ways that leverage the research about what works and consider teachers' and students' realities. Jayne and I had a chance to meet through a common acquaintance. I don't even know how Jayne knows Jethro, but we just happened to be on a group thing, and I don't even know what to call it. I don't know if we would call it a mastermind alliance or something, but just a group of people with some similar interests. And after the meeting, as I do, I know it sounds kind of creepy, but in this day and age, maybe it's not that bad. I went to Google and I Googled Jayne's name. And then I saw, that she was a researcher and she had done this and that. And so somehow I signed up on Google Scholar to be notified every time Jayne's name was mentioned as a source in a research paper. And I'm getting like half a dozen times a week, I'm getting emails about Jayne. So I'm thinking, man, I need to get to know Jayne a little bit more. So Jayne, because it was the research that, I know you're doing a lot of things and you have an interesting background, but it's the research that I kind of wanted to talk about first, because so many of the folks that listen to this podcast are interested in research. So what were your areas of research?
Well, thank you very much, Gene. It's a pleasure to get to talk to you more. You noted in the introduction, I'm no longer in the day-to-day research in the same way. So it was so fun for me to hear that you were still getting these notifications. I get the same notifications, and it's helpful to see my work still having impact as it goes on. So my main areas of research, I started as an English teacher by training and went up to do a PhD to try to understand adolescent literacy better, and specifically in the age of technology and how things were changing. And I developed some expertise around understanding the intersection between students' interest and their kind of interest-driven learning and what technology affords. I always have a literacy lens to almost everything I studied. And I always was looking at what were the implications back to classrooms, even though most of my research was in like online fandoms of all places. So for example, Gene, are you familiar with fan fiction?
No, I was going to ask you about that, to explain that a little bit.
Okay. So Gene, tell me, what's one of your favorite TV shows or movies that you know the characters, you know the people?
A Few Good Men.
A Few Good Men. So imagine you've watched A Few Good Men a couple of times and you want to know, like, what happens after the movie ends, after the courtroom scene, after the big drama, or maybe you want to tell the story of how did they get there before the movie started. And you need a creative outlet for this. you might write some stories about that where you place it into the setting, you stay true to the characters, but you're writing your own kind of creative. Maybe you didn't like the ending and you want to revise the ending. So that's what fan fiction is. And it's wildly popular. It's been popular before there were the technological resources to keep people connected. But with the age of the internet, and especially with things like online forums that pull people together with similar interests, I bet, I haven't done it, like we did this live, but I bet I could find a few good men fan fiction stories that are written and posted online where people who have a similar interest would give you feedback on the stories that you write. And I studied a community of 12,000, mostly young women, who were using the video game The Sims to write stories and to like graphic, almost like graphic novel kind of fan fiction, where they had the images from The Sims plus the stories that they would write, and they would post it in these online communities. Now, I told you I was an English teacher. So as an English teacher, you try to make these things happen, like writer's workshop, peer review, all of this stuff happen in your classroom. And it's like pulling teeth. Kids don't want to do it, or, they don't know how to give each other feedback. So when I found this online community as I was starting my dissertation process, I was like, they're doing it. Like they're giving each other the feedback that I wish they would be giving on the essays that I was requiring them to write in class. And I wanted to understand, like, why? What was compelling about that? And how were they doing it? They were very skilled feedback givers. They were very skilled also at finding collaborators. Say you weren't, like, I had one research participant, for example, who was very poor at writing the dialogue and the grammar and the structure of things. So she kind of outsourced it in the community, and she had people be her beta readers and do that revision work for her so that she could post a more polished product. And it was very collaborative, very interesting. And so then I asked the question, why should English teachers care that young people were doing this work in their own kind of off times? And I did a bunch of professional learning with teachers and wrote a lot about this with some other collaborators of mine that I've worked with over time, to just try to understand, like, what are the principles and how could they apply to classrooms and improve classroom-based writing without taking the stuff that kids were doing on their off time and bringing it into schools in a way that ruined it for them. So it was never about that. It was mainly about what could teachers and educators learn from the good learning that was happening organically in social spaces, and how could that improve classrooms?
Jayne, don't stop now. So what, so how do we do that? Because I think, the things that I see with respect to writing, there are kind of two things that I see. One, where is similar to a lot of content. If we can break things down for kids and actually show them how to do things, that whole virtuous cycle or cycle of victory is they become more interested in doing it, their motivation increases, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that I see is that we trick kids into doing work. What you just described, I think, kind of fits into that category, but we don't want to take that joy away from them by bringing it into the classroom, which they think there's no joy in writing in the classroom. So what were some of the suggestions, or what were some of the findings of how to do this?
Well, one participant that I followed, I found very interesting. So when I did the initial dissertation research, I had some back and forth asynchronous written interviews with participants, and I studied their practices and got to know them that way. And that gave me some idea, but it was just the beginning. So I then got connected with a young woman who, in my research, we called her Laura, not her real name. I remain in touch with Laura today, but I knew Laura when she was an eighth grader rising up into high school. And my research apprentice at the time, who is now Dr. Valerie March, and we interviewed Laura every year for the 4 years of her high school experience. And Laura was a brilliant writer. She was working on her first novel at the time. She's now in her mid 20s and she's a playwright. She's very successful. So I say all that to say that even in a successful writer, we studied the ways in which she was taking some of her successful writing practices and trying to implement them into her classroom base and the resistance that she would get. So, as a skilled writer, she was put into AP classes early in her high school career. By the first semester of her freshman year, she was in AP English classes. And AP English classes are very formulaic, the kinds of writing that they like. And so she met with a lot of resistance as she tried to be more creative. And she found that she was able to appreciate the fan fiction space, the external space, the creative spaces to keep her juices flowing. And she was able to do some kind of bringing it back into the classroom space, but it was pretty limited. So one of the things that we suggested for teachers as a result of that is in much the same way that we say around reading, like more reading helps readers become good readers. Like there was the movement of just like 20 minutes a day, just read to kids, those kinds of things. Once the basic skills are met, the like kind of more begets more. And the idea being give kids the opportunity for free writing, for more creative writing, pull that in. The other thing is she found that she was able to get better feedback and more meaningful feedback from the fan fiction space, the online space, because anonymity was a way in which it was protecting both her and the people who gave her feedback. So we talked with teachers about the ways to set up some sort of anonymous feedback mechanisms within your classes so that you don't necessarily know, like when you tell kids who are sitting next to each other to trade their papers, that's pretty vulnerable in terms of sharing writing, depending on the kind of writing. And so we put systems in place of and the internet and like Google Classroom and other like platforms now make this much easier. But at the time we were doing it, we were talking about just anonymizing the papers, anonymizing feedback, things like that. So after working with Laura and learning from her for 4 years, I then did another study actually in a classroom, and it was in a writing classroom. And it was a 3-week kind of, they called it a Maymester, like a short course at the end of a school year. And we worked with that teacher and we kind of created this kind of ideal creative writing, fandom based writing experience for kids. They're trying to test some of these ideas. So bringing fan fiction to school in a way that didn't co-opt it. And so some of the indicators and some of the Google Scholar alerts you're getting might be from those studies as well.
Okay, question. So you followed Laura for 4 years. She was doing her fandom stuff. At the
Mm-hmm.
same time, she was in these more structured type of AP classes. Did you see an improvement in her writing that could be attributed to the structure that she was learning in the AP classes, that she may not have liked it, but it was spilling over?
Honestly, I think that's hard to assess with this particular writer because as an eighth grader, like that first summer that I met her, she gave me the draft of her novel that she had already written. And Jayne, it was impressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
She has yet to publish it. She still has it. I had the opportunity to see her in person last September, and this is maybe 10 years since I've known her. And, she hasn't published it yet, but she still thinks about that novel. So she was pretty skilled at the
Yeah.
time. So I'm sure she learned some things, but
Well, and I think this is what, it's kind of difficult for me. Every time I talk to somebody, I'm thinking, how can we implement this? And Laura would be one of those folks that, well, that's interesting to me, but if I'm working in a comprehensive high school, how can I work, how can I not, extinguish this interest and this passion in doing this writing and at the same time help improve skills, which are, you know, until you get to a certain level as a writer, they're pretty demanded, in your
Right.
writing. You have to be competent as a writer. And I'm thinking if we're going to make a transition in a second to academic writing, where I don't care how good Laura is in fan fiction. Now you got to do academic writing. It's a different type of thing. So I had a question in there somewhere.
I have a potential answer, even if there wasn't a fully formed question, Jayne.
Okay.
Um, so, you know, I got a lot of these questions as we were publishing this research as well. Like, so what does this matter? How does this work? And so my colleague Alicia Magnifico and I taught a graduate seminar to master's level students. They were all teachers, and we taught them about our findings and about the literature of fan-based research, and then followed 4 of those teachers in the following school year to see how did they take what they learned from the fandom spaces and from our discussion of it, that graduate seminar, and implement it into their classrooms. So we followed a kindergarten teacher, we followed 3 secondary teachers as well, and trying to understand like the so what of this. All of the teachers, as it happened, that school year that we followed them was the 2019-2020 school year. So the research got a wee bit interrupted by COVID, but we were following them and seeing how they implemented it. And those teachers, like one of the high school teachers, implemented more like writer's workshop kind of swapping of papers and things like that. Because one of the things that you find in the fandom spaces is that kids are learning from models, and they're learning from accessible models, not necessarily perfect teacher created, or in this day and age, AI created models. Like they're learning from each other and upskilling that way. We also found most interesting to me was the kindergarten teacher. Like, how does a kindergarten teacher take this idea of being a fan, and what does it do for literacy for them in writing? And what she did is she connected fandoms to author studies, where you study a particular author for a little while. And so with her kindergartners, for example, she might study Eric Carle books like The Very Hungry Caterpillar. And how does that help a young, developing, emergent writer? Well, once you show them the patterns, they start mimicking those patterns. And so that one of her kindergartners then wrote her own story around like the very hungry kitty cat, because she really liked kitty cats. You can see the way that by studying a particular genre or studying a particular writer, that it gives the writers skills to adapt for their own purposes. And so we saw that throughout the grades, and the ways in which the model of an existing text or an existing story world helped writers develop their skills. So it's almost like if it reduces some of the cognitive load, then we can get at some of those skill buildings.
Well, and it seems, I always describe it as what before how. What does this look like? Let's look at
Mhm.
some models. Let's talk about these models. Let's talk about these characters. If you're going to continue to talk about these characters, what are their essential elements that you want to carry forward, et cetera, et cetera. Interesting. Very interesting. Maybe we'll chat more later.
Thanks. Yeah.
A lot of questions. But one of the questions I did want to get to what I alluded to earlier, the idea of academic writing,
Mhm.
because I think in my audience, there are 2 big interests that folks have. One is to write a book. And we had a fellow, a guest on, Mark Combs, to talk about how to get a book published.
Okay.
So there's an episode there for those of you if you haven't caught it yet. And then the other thing they want to do is they want to get a doctorate. Okay. And, how many folks have you talked to that, oh, I just have to do my dissertation. Oh, that's it? That's all you have left? Okay, we'll get on it. So I know you still are on dissertation committees, aren't you? You're an
Yes, I
advisor.
I
So
am.
What advice would you have for folks at all levels, at all stages of looking to get a doctorate early on, and those who are getting ready to maybe choose a research topic to, trying to finish writing that dissertation? Any advice you would have?
There's so much advice. So I am about to put my final doctoral student at the University of Rochester in just a couple of weeks after we record this. And I also stay connected to that work through the University of Pennsylvania, where I'm a lecturer there supporting doctoral students. They call me unofficially, the students there call me their lovin' and shovin' that coach. That's what I do.
Yeah,
I am
yeah.
a dissertation accountability coach in some ways for them. And I think accountability is one thing, but let me say early on, find a program that works with your schedule, with your life. I'm imagining that the part of your audience that you're thinking about here, Jayne, are educators, school leaders with full busy lives. So figure out the program and the situation that's right for you. Maybe it involves taking a sabbatical and you can go all in. That's the way I did it, is I stepped away from the classroom and went all in. And not everybody can do that. There are lots of different programs with lots of different structures. The program that I work in at the University of Pennsylvania is more of a meet once a month in person kind of situation with a little bit of an extended time every July. So I think there are a lot of different models, but I would advise anyone thinking about it to think very carefully about what their scheduling needs are and what supports they have in their family, what resources they have, and find the program that matches them. Once you're in, do your best to try to carve out the space and time to do the deep thinking. A doctoral degree for me was the hardest and most rewarding thing I had ever done. And I had no idea the ways it would impact my identity and who I thought myself to be and capable of being.
Could stop you for just 1 second because I think that's such an important point. I felt exactly the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear people talk, oh, I'm never going to make it up in salary. And I'm thinking it's beyond that. The rewards are beyond the salary that you're not going to make up.
I agree. It changed the way that I look at the world, how I think about education. It changed almost everything about my life. And it forged bonds with other researchers. I have a very strong, continuing to this day, grad school sisterhood group that I tried to foster for my own students. They call it the Lammers academic family, of like pulling them together.
Yeah.
So I also think that when you're in it, and especially when you're at the independent phases, so it may start at comprehensive exams or whatever that transition period is where you go from coursework to shaping out your independent study, that's the place where you need community and you need accountability more than ever. And not every program will give that to the doctoral students. So you have to construct it yourself, I think.
Well, I think it's quite a compliment that they call it the Lammers family. I remember my first chair, I sent a draft of something and he didn't even respond. I mean, in retrospect, I just think it was that bad that he didn't
Yeah.
even respond. And then I got a new chair, and her job, which she did continually, was kick me in the behind,
Yeah.
to keep me on track and to not get too down about
Right.
things.
Jayne, I hear that and I hear those situations a lot. And I don't want to make, in much the way that I always tried to make sure that my research was never teacher bashing
Uh,
or like that. I also don't want to bash the faculty members, because there are systems in place in academia that honestly set them up to make it so like they don't get rewarded, they don't get promoted. Like the system does not incentivize them to be good advisors all the time. And it's really unfortunate. So I have issues with the system more than I have with the people. And that's where I think there's an opportunity for roles like what I'm playing at University of Pennsylvania to be this kind of space that I'm doing work of like actually looking at documents for the students, helping them understand how to navigate relationships with chairs, helping them understand the expectations. And there's a way in which that lightens the load for the
Yeah.
faculty members. And it
Yeah.
makes the process better for the students. So I think our program is particularly unique, but there's a way in which I think students can kind of advocate for themselves. I was really benefited by becoming friends with women who were ahead of me in the program and who had my same advisor. And so I would go to them and just say, how do I navigate her in this way? What's the best
Yeah.
way to keep me out of trouble? And that was great.
Great. Great advice. Great advice. Well, in my introduction, I said I was really looking forward to talking to you because you operate in the intersection of literacy, research, and technology.
Yes.
And so you said that you still have some students, a few students, but you have a full-time job now. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So in the pandemic, when everything shifted, I stayed open to possibilities. I came back from my Fulbright experience in Indonesia thinking that was going to be how I stayed an academic. I had done that experience to try to infuse some life into my career as a faculty member. And so I planned I was going to go back and forth to Southeast Asia and just continue that work. And the pandemic had other ideas. So
Yeah, yeah.
um, I stayed open to possibilities. I needed to come to live in the Chicagoland area to support my family. And I had a great dean at the time who allowed me to be mobile. But ultimately, this opportunity at Edmentum came up in the summer of 2022, and I leapt at the chance. And the way that I describe my role now as the director of learning design is that it's like all of those implication sections that I had to write in my articles or in my own research. I have to put them into practice every day. And I can't only be focused on adolescent literacy anymore. I have to think about education much more broadly. Edmentum has learning solutions for K through 12. We do everything from assessment and intervention type products that are very kind of skill focused, gap filling, learning acceleration. We do that all the way up to we're releasing new career and technical education, fully online courses that lead to certification. So we do it all. And my team is responsible for building frameworks that make sure that good pedagogy and good learning are happening in our products. So it was really compelling to me to work for a company that so valued research that they would even have a role like mine.
Just to clarify, EdMomentum is a um, technology platform for
Mhm.
education.
Yes,
Okay.
it's a K-12 digital curriculum provider. We do assessments, supplemental, and fully online courses.
Okay. Now, you've spent a half hour talking about your background and your expertise. And so that was important for you to work for a company that valued that.
Yes.
So if I'm a consumer, if I'm a consumer, I'm a K-12 or K-14 or wherever this may be, what should I look for in a technology platform? Because just so you know, you're not the only one, in case you weren't aware.
I know.
What should they look for? What should they avoid? I mean, are there some red flags right away that should eliminate some of the products out there?
I think I'll go from my limited experience, right? So I've been in this industry now 2.5 years, almost 3 years. And I think it really matters to look for a curriculum provider, look for a technology provider where you're not going to just sign a contract, get it get access and then be left alone. I think partnership matters so that there are supports in the field. They will be in your school with you to help make sure that implementation works, right? I think that kind of partnership support is crucial. Otherwise, school leaders are just buying another product, and who knows if it'll actually get used, who knows if it will actually have the impact that it promises on their students. Next, I think, what's the role of research in informing the design of any product? And are they doing not only research on my end, on the front end, to make sure that it's well designed, but then are they doing efficacy research on the back end to prove that the product actually does what it claims to do? And I would ask those questions. And are there third-party validating sorts of things? So, for example, maybe it's Quality Matters. Has Quality Matters reviewed the courses, and is that giving it its stamp of approval? Has other like level access, has there been a logic model that got put together that says that all the assumptions the company's making actually come to pass and are valid in the research? Research is very important to me, so I would want to know that the product is using the research well.
I appreciate you clarifying and mentioning like third parties, because I haven't seen a product that wasn't claimed to be effective.
Right.
And so that's very important that it's third party. The other thing that I have with respect to a concern about technology, and maybe you could talk me down a little bit about this, is you mentioned that people buy things and then they don't use them.
Mm-hmm.
My concern is just the opposite, that they buy things and that's all they use. And all of a sudden, a teacher is in the background versus being in the foreground and using a tool. I know you have a PhD, so I'm sure you have an opinion on that. Could you tell me your opinion on that?
I do indeed, Jayne. I think the way that I would say that is, again, going back to this idea of partnership. So, what's the partnership between the educator, the student, and whatever the platform is as well? And like, what data does the teacher get? How does it then require the teacher to continue to monitor and engage and see opportunities to help students? Like, the computers are not going to save us, right? They're not the end all be all. They're not the silver bullet. I think as a longtime educator and researcher, it helped me come to a company like Edmentum, knowing that they put educators first in terms of our design of our products. And we always kind of design with the educator in mind for how they're going to stay in the loop. It's much the same way people often talk about AI. You have to keep humans in the loop. We've got to keep teachers in the loop. We are not designing products that are teacher proof. We are designing products that are teacher forward, teacher full. Like, the teachers are engaged in these products and helping to make the decisions. They know the kids, right? The data only gives you so much information about a child, and we need to be putting tools, whatever tool you choose, in conversation with the teachers and the kids to meet needs.
Good answer. Good answer. I
Well,
like
thank
that.
you.
I like that. I just, and I think the pandemic accelerated this along with a lot of things that people, we have some sort of disaster and it accelerates things. We accelerated virtual conferences, virtual meetings, we accelerated that. And then I think one of the things that that got accelerated, but we didn't learn a lesson from, is how to step back from that now. Because now we visit classrooms where they're on a Chromebook all period, and there is no instruction. And so trying to hit that balance, having teachers be in the loop, as you said, and not on the sideline.
Right.
Jayne, do you have any questions for me?
I do, Jayne. I've loved that you're asking me about research and giving me a chance to talk about that. And I'm wondering how research informs the work that you do. What's the role of research for you?
The role of research and evidence guides what I do. And I'm a little bit of a contrarian in that I don't think as I said in the beginning, what I'm interested in is implementation of things. Research is no good unless something is that if we can implement it, if a teacher is going to implement it. And I've heard people say, well, if the teachers just knew the research, then they would change their behavior. And I don't agree with that. I mean, for example, the research, we have a pretty good idea about how to lose weight and be more healthy. We've got lots of research on that. Does that change everybody's behavior? No. No. So I think, there are people who have to be grounded in research like you, develop products that work, and then when the evidence is not your research, the evidence is that it worked in my classroom. And that's my idea of how we share the research. You know, people like you and I, we could curate research but it's just not that, it's a so what? Like you
Right,
said, so what? How does this, okay, don't tell me about cognitive load again. Don't tell me about this again. How do I implement this, in a way that I recognize that it works and I can see it make a difference in my classroom?
right.
So, so I'm a little contrarian. I think why comes after I've seen success,
Okay. I understand that.
like to explain it, because to me, research is just an explanation of the natural world.
Hmm.
So if I experience it in the natural world, and I say, God, how come that worked? Now I'm more apt to be interested in knowing about it.
I understand that. So much of my work now is in the translating of research, like taking what the researchers write about and say works about cognitive load, for example, and then my team synthesizes that and then communicates it to content developers or communicates it to product managers to advocate for certain changes or communicates it out to the field who uses our products in more customer facing ways. And I'm wondering, it makes me kind of eager to talk with you as a more of a skeptic or like somebody who's pushing back a little bit about what are the barriers to incorporating research, or like what do you think those of us who are in that role of translator, what's our responsibility? What do we need to be doing in order to make sure that the research really does have an impact?
I think we go back to Aesop and the boy who cried wolf,
Okay.
because everything, I mean, I'm in California, and it's the law, you know, state ed code, that all materials need to be research based. And you know what? Back as long as I can remember from the 70s, everything has been research based, but there was not necessarily that third party, you know, evaluation of the research that you talked about. So I think that's part of the problem, is that teachers have been hearing that forever. And
Mhm.
then we had, like, more recently, we had, the Emily Hanford told a story.
Yes.
So now, well, wait a second. Remember, teachers, all that research we said that this is the way to do it? Never mind. Never mind. Now we're going to do it this new way because now we have better research. And that's true. It is. We've done, the research is better, but that's still, how do you get past that skepticism when you've been told that forever? I mean, you could just hear the eyes rolling. Yeah, this is evidence-based. This is what the research says.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that research is very politicized, every as our schools,
Yes.
right? And so what counts as research, what counts as evidence, what counts as evidence based, who writes the policies that allow things to come into classrooms or not. None of it's pure, Jayne. None of it's
No.
pure. Hmm.
Well, and then I read, when I get discouraged, and I didn't even think to consider this until I was in the doctoral program and we had to learn how to evaluate research. But you read so many books education books where they have a bibliography, where they have a reference page, and how many references an author makes to their own prior work that was only an opinion.
Yeah.
And it looks like, look at all of this research,
Right.
and people are fooled. So,
You've got to understand what's being cited
yeah.
and what is that research. There's problems with peer review, but there's a lot to be valued by the peer review process.
Yeah. Well, Jayne, any final words? Where can people find you? Where can people, and we'll put these in the show notes.
I have provided you with links to LinkedIn, to my Google Scholar page, if they're interested in the research. If any of it's behind a paywall that they can't access, feel free to reach out to me. And then I've also given access to the site that I kept, where I kept pretty much a log of my experience in my Fulbright in Indonesia. So
Great,
it's a little
great.
fun, light reading.
Jayne, it has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Jayne. It's been delightful to talk with you.
If you're enjoying these podcasts, tell a friend. Also, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can follow me on Blue Sky at gtavernetti, on Twitter, X, at gtavernetti, and you can learn more about me and the work I do at my website, tesscg.com. That's TESSCG.com, where you will also find information about ordering my books, Teach Fast, Focused, Adaptable, Structured Teaching, and maximizing the impact of coaching cycles.